All right, creating change. Please welcome to the stage Stephanie DePonio, Program and Outreach Manager for Michigan Organization for Adolescent Sexual Health.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie DePonio. I use she, her pronouns, and like they said, I'm the Program and Outreach Manager for the Michigan Organization on Adolescent Sexual Health, or MOASH. I am honored to be here today to present Shane Shananaquet with the Youth Leadership Award, which this year is underwritten by the Task Force Youth Leadership Institute. As a 16-year-old trans, gay, and native young person, Shane lives and breathes intersectionality. He is the son of a single parent and lives in a rural community. His multifaceted identity uniquely enhances his activism. Shane has had an enormous impact at our work at MOASH, our staff, and the people we serve. One of our core values is that our work is to be youth-informed. Shane has been a member of our Youth Advisory Council, My Voice, for 2 years. Prior to his official joining of My Voice, he was involved with MOASH through numerous activities. We don't have time to name all of Shane's efforts and accomplishments, but here are some highlights. Shane was active in a coalition which addressed anti-LGBTQ victimization in K-12 schools. He brought his youth perspective to the Michigan Department of Education's guidance on safe and supportive schools for LGBTQ students. He is also youth ambassador for the Tyler Clementi Foundation. Last year at Pride, he spoke to thousands of people next to Gretchen Whitmer, our current governor. And following the Parkland school shooting, he organized and led his peers in a school-wide vigil. And as a proactive advocate, Shane has founded a sibling chapter of the National March for Our Lives movement. We are so lucky and humbled that Shane has chosen to work with us. He spends his valuable time and energy creating a safer environment for Michigan's youth, and Shane is honest and transparent. He is willing to speak up, speak out, and educate. He is vocal when people should be educating themselves, and in turn abates the practice of putting that responsibility on other marginalized youth. Shane's fights for injustice and many intersecting LGBTQ issues have him speaking at rallies, conferences, sitting on panels, and participating in multi-day trainings. He has carried out his astounding activism while working at Starbucks, taking part in an extremely challenging international baccalaureate program, and applying to competitive colleges across the country. Shane is fortunate to have a fierce mother, Stella, who is his biggest cheerleader and advocate. Throughout his life, and all of her efforts have been geared towards providing opportunities for him to thrive in a safe school environment and to be his genuine self. I always look forward to working with Shane because he shares his humor, authenticity, and humility with everyone around him. From the beginning of his involvement, it's been obvious that this is so much more than a job or resume builder for Shane. His extraordinary passion and commitment to social justice has made him a huge part of the MOASH family. Shane, it's unbelievable how much you've accomplished by the age of 16. I feel privileged to witness part of your journey, and I can't wait to see how you will continue to make a world a safer and more inclusive space. Thank you for your work, your dedication, and most importantly, for being you.
This is my family. We have our ups and downs, but overall, we're pretty tight. This is my entire family. We're small, but we love and rely on each other. I would fight for them any day. We are multi-ethnic and multi-gendered. We move and love as one unit and are nearly impenetrable. We are strong. I march because my Mexican sister shouldn't have to hear chants about walls being built. I march because she works full-time and still can't afford health care. I march because she was forced back to work when her baby was just 3 weeks old because we don't support mothers in this country. I march because she has lost many jobs due to lack of affordable, reliable childcare. I march because my Native American brother who passes for white is learning about and acknowledging his white male privilege, like I want all young boys to do. I march because I want all young boys to learn a different narrative than the one that says women are here for men's amusement, to be grabbed and assaulted, and to be blamed for men's behavior. I march because disabled people, like my brother, don't deserve a president that mocks them. I march so my black nephew knows that his voice counts. I march because he is more likely to be killed or imprisoned than he is to go to college. I march because he too will learn to treat women as his equals, that no means no and only yes means yes. I march so he doesn't have to learn a different way to interact with law enforcement than his white peers or risk his life. I march because my Mexican niece will grow up in the same world as her mother. I march because I want her to earn the same wages as white males. I march because I want her to have the freedom to make her own choices for her body. I march so she will know that determination and hard work is what leads to success, not your heritage or the color of your skin. I march because my white mother is more than her small paycheck. I march because the world is full of parents doing it all alone. I march so that other single parents know that they are more than a statistic. I march because my mom is a strong role model, a strong ally, and a large voice. I march so I can show her that all her work was worth it. I march for myself. I march because although I started life as a girl, I am here today as a gay, transgender Native boy. I march because I am more likely to be bullied or to take my own life than my cisgender or heterosexual classmates. I march because it is still legal to discriminate against me in housing, school, and employment in many states. I march because I am called a predator and mentally ill. I march because none of these things are true. You just wait and see what I can accomplish.
Thank you. Before I get started with my planned remarks, let me throw this out there real quick. I stand with our transgender military members. No matter what he does, your service is appreciated and this fight isn't over. Thank you. Okay then. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all enjoying the conference. My name is Shananaquet. I'm 16 years old, and in fact, I was born on June 28th, 2002, the 33rd anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Some say it's coincidence, I say fate. I'm from Adrian, Michigan. You probably don't know where that is, but it's right about here. I'm just a regular high school senior trying to figure out the rest of his life in the next 5 months. And I am so happy to be here with you today. The video you just saw was made in December 2016 as a part of the Women's March on Washington Youth Initiative. I was one of 35 young people globally that were selected to act as youth ambassadors for the original Women's March on Washington. I was the token male and the only openly transgender ambassador. I'm in that role fairly frequently, and I'm generally okay with it. I know it's rare to meet a queer, transgender, Native American teenager who was raised in a rural area by a single parent. I'm willing to be that face in order to introduce important intersections into the conversation. It was and still is important to me to get beyond this tokenism and to work to make sure all voices are at the table. I knew that conversations about women's rights must include trans women, specifically trans women of color, because their experience cannot be understood under the general women's rights umbrella. I knew that conversations about restrictive healthcare must include discussion around the difficulty transgender people face in accessing appropriate and supportive healthcare. The Women's March mobilized millions of people and continues to do so. I am excited to watch as their scope has broadened to include these topics. I'm an accidental activist. I wasn't trying to be. It just happened. It started when at age 13, I spoke in front of the Michigan State Board of Education regarding the passing of a guidance to protect LGBT students. My mom, my superintendent, and I waited several hours for the chance to speak for just 3 short minutes. Bigots from all across the state and further came to fill the room to capacity so that supporters were unable to join. After speaking, I was approached by several people, some from local advocacy groups, some from the Department of Education, and some from local media. Little did I know, the greatest connections I made that day would stick with me for a long time. One of the greatest, most supportive people in my life, Lori Beckoffer, invited us to return months later and speak before the board voted on the guidance. We went again, waited forever again, explained the importance of the guidance again, and celebrated after it was passed. That guidance remains in place today despite a totally different political climate, and I am proud to have been a part of it. Because of what we did, Michigan schools have a reference point backed by research and actual experience to support their LGBT students and keep them safe. After the guidance, I was greeted with many other opportunities to advocate. My experience with extreme bullying at my school led to me becoming a youth ambassador for the Tyler Clementi Foundation. When the Parkland, Florida students put out the call, I founded Lenawee County's chapter of March for Our Lives because I believe it's important to hold our lawmakers accountable for their actions and let them know exactly who it is that will be voting them out of office if they continue to fail to protect us. I've been honored to participate in panels and workshops that aim to train educators in a meaningful way. I've been blessed to be a member of MOASH's My Voice team, where we advise and advocate for inclusive sex education and sexual health. I've shared the stage with Governor Whitmer, and I've introduced Dr. Abdul El Sayed in his own gubernatorial race. This wasn't my plan. I didn't set out to find this path, but it found me, and I'm so glad that it did. My activism started small and grew. I've met strong, influential people on this path, and those meetings led to other opportunities. I've been able to influence others and make real change at my school, in my community, and in my state. My goal is to lead by example. I want other young people to see me and see what I'm doing and think, yeah, that's important. Yeah, I want in on that. There is so much injustice around us. There's no shortage of causes for you to advocate for. Our voices count, and when we put them together, they are loud. Standing up for what is right isn't always easy, but it is always necessary. I'm excited for my generation to clean up the messes left behind by generations before us. Please join me. Small steps make big paths, and others will follow. I'm honored and humbled to accept this award today, and I hope to continue to work to make you proud of me and to show other kids the way. We can do it. Thank you so much.
Friends, please welcome to our stage, Marco Quiroga.
That's right. Bass drum. Bass drum? Oh. Bass drum. Bass drum? That's right.
Little crane change. What an honor it is to be here today to present the Evelyn and Walter Jr. Haas Fund Award for Outstanding LGBTQ Leadership for Immigrant Rights to a friend and a fearless advocate, Jonathan Jays Green. As last year's recipient, I cannot think of anyone more deserving to pass this remarkable honor to than Jonathan. Jonathan is a queer, undocumented, Afro-Panamanian DACA recipient. He is an organizer, speaker, strategist, and believer. He is one of the co-founders and the director of the Undocu Black Network, a multi-generational network of Black undocumented immigrants organizing their own communities and building power. These are hard times. These are very hard times to be a leader in our movements today, offering us little time for self-care and joy. Yeah, at a time when our lives are under attack, Jonathan is defending our community, and he does so every day with courage, love, and joy. Family, we are in a state of emergency. Our immigrant communities are being kidnapped, brutalized, and inhumanely detained by Trump's government. Children as young as 6 and our transgender sisters like Roxana Hernandez have died while in the custody of ICE and CBP. Black immigrants face particular danger from Trump's actions, as our current immigration system is already deeply rooted in anti-Black racism. Black immigrants are 3 times more likely to be arrested than any other immigrant group, and thus more likely to be detained and deported. This is a consequence of our nation's shameful racist legacy of criminalizing Blackness. Tackling anti-Blackness is an immigrant rights issue. tackling anti-blackness is an LGBTQ issue. Trump and his allies are at the center of this as well. They continue to perpetuate lies about our immigrant community, referring to us nothing more than rapists and murderers. We must resist this dehumanization. Jonathan has been at the front lines of this resistance. From MSNBC to Teen Vogue, Jonathan has spoken out and shined light to the truth. That our immigrant community, when given the equal opportunity, have and continue to build a better America. And at this pivotal point in our nation's history, now more than ever, we need truth tellers and freedom fighters like Jonathan. So family, here's my call to action. Share the truth. Resist the hate. Embrace the love. We need to rally all those of moral conscience and concern for our immigrant family, friends, and neighbors. Like Jonathan, spread a message based both in truth and love every opportunity you get. And lastly, support and celebrate the leadership of individuals like Jonathan. In the face of great adversity to himself, his family, and community, Jonathan inspiringly perseveres and paves a path recognizing that Black liberation leads to all our liberation. So join me now in applauding this year's recipient of the Outstanding LGBTQ Leadership in Immigrant Rights Award, my undocumented and unafraid, queer and unashamed movement brother, Jonathan Jays Green.
Love you too. Thank you so much for this incredible award. I want to quickly thank and acknowledge my partner, my boo, Leo, who came all the way from DC. We've been learning that choosing to be in love during such hard times is a revolutionary act. So thank you for choosing to be on this journey with me. I also want to thank from the bottom of my heart, to all of the leaders, mentors, and people who've come before me who really inspire me and are the reason why I'm here. People like Isa, Ola, Louis, Nikasa, Marco, there's so many of you. Thank you so much. I believe that my leadership is a reflection of the collective that I'm honored to be a part of. I also want to ask all the Black LGBTQ migrants in this room to stand up, to be recognized. Whether you're with Undocu Black, with Baji, with the Black LGBT Migrant Project. Yes. And I want to share this moment with you. And I want all the people and the organizations in this room to see you, to follow your leadership, to invest in your development, and to support your vision. This award is just another step in the long road to have Black immigrants taking their rightful place leading our movements. Black immigrants are often criminalized, targeted, and deported, while historically being invisibilized in all of our movements. And that's not acceptable. And to be clear, the end of the work is not just mere representation. I mean, that's nice, but that's not the goal. I don't want Black migrants to just be criminalized and targeted at the same rates than white immigrants from Eastern Europe. That's not it. What this political moment calls for is much bigger than that. It calls for a bold vision for the future that centers justice, freedom, and liberation. Just yesterday, we freed another Black migrant from detention, Victor, with the help of TLC. Victor came to this country seeking asylum and fleeing brutality back in Ghana, only to be met with the brutality of our detention centers for years. And while I'm really happy that he's now able to be back, he's now able to enter the country and seek safety, I know that that's not the end. Our work is not done until all of us are free. And lastly, I grew up in the church, so I'm a church kid. Shout out to my therapist. But I grew up with call and response, and it's really one of the tools that really helps me feel grounded. And I want to set a set of intentions in the room for our people here in this room and across the world. And if you resonate with any of these intentions, feel free to join me. You can say, "May it be so." Let's have a trial run. So if I say, "May all of us get home safely," you say, all right. May we experience true and permanent safety beyond cops, ICE, jails, and prisons. May we heal from the physical and emotional and mental trauma and scars from our migration stories. May our communities receive and live in the abundance that we are owed. May Black, Indigenous, queer, and trans communities experience the justice and liberation we deserve. May we end the patriarchy once and for all. May we see an end to the economic, legal, and political systems that have profited and continue to profit from our lives and that of our kin. And may our people experience freedom from our oppressors. From here in Detroit, down through the southern border, all the way down to Brazil, through the Caribbean Sea, all the way to Palestine, down to Cambodia, to all across the world. And it shall be so. Thank you so much.
Creating change. Please welcome Stacey Long Simmons, Director of the Task Force's Advocacy and Action Department.
Hello, everybody. It's so good to see you. My name is Stacey Long Simmons. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Action here at the Task Force, where we believe in queering everything, and most especially faith, equity, and democracy. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our next guest, and I am so, so excited. I really cannot tell you how much I'm restraining myself from just buzzing over the stadium. You all know, you've heard that this was an amazing election, and our Congress looks markedly different than it had the day before the election. One of the people who is the face of our new Congress has taken the time out to come back home to her home district and give you guys a greeting. So, Representative Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Wait, there's more. Congresswoman Tlaib, let me just tell you a little bit about her. It sounds like you never heard of her, though. She is part of the amazing blue wave, the female wave, the diverse wave, the LGBT wave that has entered Congress, and she's already made a name for herself. She, as I like to think of, is a fierce woman who leads. She was the first of two Muslim women who are serving in the Michigan. She was the first Muslim woman to serve in the Michigan legislature, and now she's the first of two Muslim women serving in Congress. Yes. Her fighting spirit, whether against Trump and his hatred or for her constituents, will be part of making this country safe for all of us who are living in the margins, whether we are Muslim and Jews, queer and gender nonconforming folk, Black, people of color, poor. All of us are going to be able to rise on the tide that Congresswoman Tlaib is going to bring our way. And so without further ado, please give her a heartfelt welcome. Congresswoman Tlaib.
Welcome to the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, the city of Detroit. I want to take a moment, and it's such an important moment, be present just for this moment, that you are in a city that raised me, the city of strength. We are the most fierce, hardworking people who want to see the world that is for everyone. This is a place that is rooted in fighting for justice. This is a place that starts good shit. From the labor rights movement to the civil rights movement, and yes, the LGBTQ rights movement. Ann Arbor, East Lansing, which is very close to the city of Detroit, was one of the first communities to pass non-discrimination laws in the 1970s. And later on, not soon later on, right away, city of Detroit. We have amazing organizations. Ones that I grew up going as a teen to now as an adult, who fight every single day to ensure that the experiences of our LGBTQ neighbors are lifted up in the fight for justice. Many of them are here today, and I want to thank them for being part of this, and thank you for choosing the city of Detroit to convene. I have the honor of representing again the part of the city along with surrounding communities in Metro Detroit and the United States Congress. I always like telling people justice is my middle name. It really is. I am the eldest of 14 children and been fighting for people all my life. See my own family and my residents be able to live their lives without discrimination, oppression, and bigotry is what drives me. I want you all to know that I will continue to fight for LGBTQ rights in Congress. My first bill, Justice for All Civil Rights Act, it's at a time where right now we are trying to celebrate, different kinds of movement from MLK to so many incredible civil rights leaders. As many of you might not know, in 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, we were supposed to be able to show that the impact of the policy in itself, not showing this high threshold of intent, but just the impact on the ground was discriminatory in its practice. And the courts changed it, because after the last 50 years, they became more conservative, corporations got into the courts, and they watered it down. And what we're gonna try to do, and I know I have the support of many of my colleagues, is we're gonna try to change it and go back to that. And that includes and applies to all people, regardless of gender or sexual orientation or identity. And it complements the push for the Equality Act. And I'm really proud to be able to say, absolutely. And I'm so proud to be able to say that I've joined the Equality Caucus in Congress. Yes. Yeah, this Muslim and Palestinian is gonna keep it spicy in the Equality Caucus. We have to make sure that every piece of legislation takes into effect the experiences and needs of our LGBTQ community. I want you all to know that it's not just about legislation for me. It really isn't. I'm an organizer, community member, and activist first. We have to make sure, that we are lifting up the need for everyone to live their lives without systematic barriers rooted in bigotry and racism. We have to rid this society of oppressive ideals. We have to fight against transphobia, homophobia, racism, anti-blackness, Islamophobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, sexism, you name it. Because we know that these things are intertwined. They're so connected. We know that those that advance hate are trying to deny it for all of us. They're trying to deny all of our existence. And we know that this hate has led to trans women of color being harmed and killed. Not having many in public service speak out about it is not the way to, we have to speak out about it, and we have to end the silence. We have to ensure that schools, our communities, our workplaces, our households are safe for everyone. There's a lot of work to be done, and I know that all of you have been doing the work for years. Just know that that you have a partner in me, not only in the streets, because I will always be in the streets, but also in the halls of Congress. And I want to leave you with this. Everyone talks about how Congress looks differently, and that's beautiful, but many of us did not run to be first of anything. We really didn't. I want you to know, and this comes from me, my heart, that I want a Congress that feels differently, that talks to you all differently. Because you all deserve fighters, not politicians. So enjoy your time in Detroit. Enjoy every bit of it. Open your eyes, because not only will you see racism and oppression, all these things, but you'll also see strength. And I hope you, as it fuels you, that it allows you to encourage all of you to be even more courageous than you ever have been. And if there's ever a fight on the streets, you know to call me. I have bullhorns all over my house. I love you all, and know again that my door will always be open to you. Thank you so much, and have fun. Thank you. Take care. Bye. He just wants to say hello.
Hello. This is a YouTube video.
He loves attention.
On the way to, I don't know what, but a future in front of a camera and a mic. So I now have the pleasure of introducing our panel, our esteemed panel. metoo, as you know, has been a game changer in our society in so many respects, and our community is no different in terms of how we've been affected. I'm sorry, I'm out of breath because that was so exciting. Our community is extremely affected by sexual violence, and this is something that we need to talk about. We have great thanks to extend to Mirror Memoirs for their partnership on this panel of queer and transgender people who've survived abuse and are working to end sexual violence. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We have only 45 minutes with you, and I feel like all 5 of us together could engage you in a year-long syllabus on what we have to talk about. So I'm just going to jump right into it. My name, for folks who don't know me, is Amita Swadhin, and I am the founding director of Mirror Memoirs, which is thank you, which is a national storytelling and organizing project centering the narratives and healing, and most importantly, the leadership and social justice movements of LGBTQI, Black and Indigenous people, and other people of color who were raped or sexually assaulted as children. And I come to this work because I am a member of exactly that population. I feel like we couldn't have had a better introduction to what we're going to share with you than folks who are younger than most of us, who are Black and native to Turtle Island and Palestinian, and who have intersectional praxis. So thank you to Creating Change for putting us after those particular speakers. I want to locate where we are in this political moment before I turn it over to my beloved comrades and colleagues. Thanks to Me Too, as you know, there's been more mainstream media coverage on sexual violence and rape culture than ever before. The large majority of stories have focused on cisgender male celebrities and politicians sexually assaulting cisgender women, with Me Too founder Tarana Burke making concerted efforts to keep the focus on the population that she set out to serve over a decade ago, Black women and girls, most recently through her participation in the docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. Recent stories have also begun to link high-profile celebrity perpetrators such as Kevin Spacey and Bryan Singer to the LGBTQ community. Kevin Spacey blamed his behavior on being closeted for years. Bryan Singer claims his accusers are simply homophobic slanderers. That's the context in which we come to you with our plenary today. But we're taking a very specific focus, specifically on the rape and sexual assault of LGBTQI children of color. And I want to explain why we're getting that specific within the very broad container of addressing sexual violence in the United States. In 2012, the American Academy of Pediatrics published a study that found gender nonconformity is a risk factor for child sexual abuse for all children, especially for those male assigned at birth, who are up to 6 times likelier to be raped or sexually assaulted than their gender-conforming peers. This is a shockingly high number when you consider that the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has told us that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will experience sexual violence by the age of 18. Up to 6 times likelier than that means that for people who grow up to be trans-feminine or effeminate men, we can expect to see in the 90th percentile, right, of having survived child sexual abuse. Even in the Me Too era, most media coverage of sexual violence has focused on a unidirectional arrow of harm from cisgender women and girls, from cisgender men towards cisgender women and girls. It's been hard for queer and transgender survivors to speak out in this context. First, because LGBTQ people, and especially gay men and transgender women, have a long history of being maligned in the media and in society as sexual predators. We see this especially in the so-called bathroom bills that bigoted legislators have been calling for throughout the country. Second, there has been a complete erasure of cisgender women as harm doers. In Mirror Memoirs, which is now an archive of 60 stories from survivors across 15 different states, about 9% of survivors across the gender spectrum were actually raped or sexually assaulted by a cisgender woman. In addition, the large majority of those interviewed experienced a cisgender woman upholding rape culture in their life by protecting the men or boys who had harmed them, by gaslighting the survivor, and by engaging in transphobic or homophobic verbal and emotional abuse against the survivor. We also know that 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ, but we rarely acknowledge that 54% of those youth say that they were running away from abuse in their home, a contributing factor to their homelessness. Finally, there has been little to no mainstream media acknowledgement of the roots of child sexual abuse in the United States, which of course was a country founded on the systemic rape and genocide of enslaved African people and indigenous people, including the systemic rape of children in both populations. That is a legacy of violence that continues today against African American people and indigenous people. So today, I have used the Mirror Memoirs container of LGBTQI people of color who survived child sexual abuse as a way to invite my esteemed colleagues and friends to join me in this discussion about ending sexual violence through an intersectional praxis that acknowledges the ways individual and institutional violence harms our communities. We're going to introduce ourselves through a 3 to 5 minute introduction each, and then get into a very short discussion together in the time that we have. So to my left, Aisha Shahidah Simmons, to her left, Bamby Salcedo, to her left, Ignacio Rivera, and to their left, Mingus. Aisha?
All right. Hello, everyone. First, I just want to say it's really powerful to be on the stage with everyone here, because everyone on this panel is doing incredible work. And also equally important to be on a panel that centers, plenary that centers child sexual abuse in a context of celebrating our work as queer activists and survivors. So often it's kind of viewed as like we don't want to talk about this issue because people will think that's what makes us this way. And so I'm really happy to be able to talk about this work as a child sexual abuse survivor and an adult rape survivor. My project is called Love with Accountability, and it looks at how accountability can be a radical form of love or compassion to address child sexual abuse, specifically in diasporic Black communities. For me, it's very important that as diasporic Black people, that we think about the ways that we can address this inhumane epidemic humanely. Because what we know, as Amita has already shared, is that the criminal justice system has not been any of our friends, right? And how do we cannot rely upon an apparatus that has systemically brutalized, raped, and dehumanized us since enslavement, since theft of Turtle Island. So based upon this, how do we address this epidemic? How do we address it? How do we look at and hold people in terms of thinking about CSA within our families? How do we hold them accountable and still be in community while centering, let me be very clear, centering those who've been harmed, while often recognizing that there's a person who's been immediately harmed, and then there are people, then the person who may have caused the harm may have also been harmed. So how do we hold all of these multiple identities in one space. And that for me is what Love with Accountability, the work that I'm doing, does, is using transformative storytelling of diasporic Black people, looking at the harm that they've experienced and maybe even the harm that they've caused as children, as adults, there are bystanders involved, and really thinking about how we can address it. It's similar but very different from Mere Memoirs in terms of collecting stories and in the form of an anthology that will be released this fall. One of the things that I also want to lift up is the work of Miriam Kaba. It's a collective called Survived and Punished. And the reason why I want to bring up Survived and Punished in this context is that, as we can see or may know in terms of Centoya Brown, Brescia Meadows, and now Kai Peterson, Kai Peterson, in terms of survivors who retaliated and to protect themselves and ended up being incarcerated. So this is another thing that we have to think about when we think about incarceration. One of the powerful things is that Brescia Meadows and Centoya and now Kai Peterson will be released next year, summer of 2020, which is not fast enough, but thank goodness it's happening. And so that we have to think about that. We think, oh, well, there are these laws in place. And a lot of times these laws that are in place harm those of us who have already been harmed. So this is why we have to rethink the criminal and justice system as a response to anything, but specifically child sexual abuse. So I will pass it on to Bamby.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Buenas tardes.
A mí me gusta darle gracias a mi poder superior por darme la oportunidad de estar aquí con ustedes. También quiero honrar la tierra en la cual estamos aquí hoy en día y honrar a la gente de esta tierra y pedirles permiso que me permitan decir unas palabras en su tierra. También quiero honrar a las personas que inafortunadamente han sido abusadas sexualmente cuando fueron niños o niñas, como yo lo fui. For those of you who were not able to understand, I just acknowledge my higher power for giving me the opportunity to be here. It's a customary thing that I do before I start any speaking. I also honor the land where we're standing on today, and I ask the people of this land to allow me to say a few words on their land. I also I want to say that I honor all of my siblings who have been victims of child sexual abuse. I also want to say that, trans women particularly, from the beginning of our movements, have been supporting our own people, right? We have vivid examples like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, right, who put their lives on the line and engage in sex work to protect young people who were thrown out from their house, right? Like we know about Star, right? And so that's something that we do. And I also want to say that, usually I talk about my experiences are similar to the experiences of my siblings. I am a survivor of child sexual abuse and also adult sexual abuse. I was sexually assaulted when I was in prison and in jail. And I think one of the things that I have come to realize and we have to really understand is how child sexual abuse sort of like follows us through our lives, how it manifests in our daily living. When we are, I'm gonna speak for myself. When I was first sexually abused by my stepfather, when I was very young, I was about maybe 4 years old. And that didn't stop until I was about 12. But the thing is that, when I talked about it or when I tried to talk about it, I was not believed, right? And when that very first incident happened, I was told not to say anything. And that's what we're told to do. And that sort of like carries with us and has carried with me, or did carry with me for a long time, until I was comfortable enough for me to talk about my truth, about that particular thing. And I think that's important that we recognize, because that's part of our liberation. It's part of our personal liberation and our collective liberation. We do not have to be ashamed of who we are. We do not have to be ashamed of what happened to us, but we can be powerful enough to stand up and lift our heads high and say, here we are, and we don't care about what happened to us in the past, but we're here in the present and walking forward. So I also want to acknowledge the work that Amita is doing, because I do have the privilege to be part of the board of Mirror Memoirs. And Amita is bringing light to this issue that many of us don't want to talk about. For us being here is historic, that we have the opportunity to be here. And this is an opportunity for us to really hold the space and hold our power and continue to tell our truth and not to be ashamed of what happened to us. So thank you.
Hola. Hello.
Hola.
I'm Takahi, everyone. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you, Amita, for organizing this. My name is Ignacio Rivera, or Ignacio Aisha Shahidah Rivera, and I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and my perpetrator is female. And I'm also a survivor of youth rape and adult rape. And I am the founder of the HEAL Project. And the HEAL Project's platform is that holistic sexuality information is a major tool in ending child sexual abuse and healing from any sexual trauma and abuse. I like to start right at sex. When we think about sexual violence, sexual assault, or child sexual abuse, all of those words have sex in them, but we never approach sex in that violence, right? We talk about power, which of course it is about power, but we don't address what is taken away from us, what we have shame about, what we struggle with after the abuse. So my platform is talking about sexuality as a whole, right? And I work on two spectrums. I work on preventative work, on talking with families and caregivers about the importance of talking to children from birth to crossing over about sex and sexuality. And on the other end, it's about a healing practice. How do we get back to the thing that was completely altered and shattered, right? How do we take back our own sex and our lives? And what often people think, what does child sexual abuse have to do with LGBT movements? It has everything to do with LGBT movements. Many people in this room are survivors. Many people have spoken out about it, and many people are still silent about it. And we understand that, because it is a difficult thing to talk about. And when we think about sexuality, sexuality encompasses so many things. It encompasses our sexual orientation. It encompasses how we make friends. It encompasses how we love, how we fuck, how we do any of those things, right? And so how are we supposed to one day magically at a teenage, as a teenager, know everything there is to know about loving, communication, negotiation, boundaries, consent, all of these things? This is something that needs to be happening when we're young. And I really have a strong focus on queer families, right? Thinking about, if you are parents, cis parents that are raising queer children or a trans child, what are you teaching them about sex, their body, their desire, how it can shift? We often use a framework of heteronormative cisgender sex, and that doesn't work. We set our children up for failure. This information, we're so frightened of sex, but yet we are struggling every single day with sexual violence. We need to be talking about these things openly and honestly so that we can prepare and just have a better understanding about how we navigate in this world. We don't magically know these things, and it's the thing that most young people don't know about. So they are targeted because they don't know what's happening. In my work, I did a media campaign called Sex Ed Is, and I interviewed a bunch of people and asked them, when was the first time you ever learned about sex? And most of the people answered that question was, when I was being raped, when I was molested. That's the first time. They didn't know. And of course, gender nonconforming, LGBT children, poor kids, children with disabilities, anyone at the margins are completely targeted, right? So we need to be thinking and having a different shift in broadening our concept of what sexuality is. And talking about sexual violence or ending sexual violence cannot happen unless we talk about child sexual abuse in this country.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mingus, and I do work with the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective. I'm a child sexual abuse survivor, and I'm also disabled. And I want to just uplift that while at the same time that queer and trans youth are disproportionately targeted, no matter what study you look at around sexual violence across the board, around any kinds of intimate violence, disabled people are twice, and I've seen it as high as 4 times more likely to be victims of intimate and sexual violence. And so whenever we have conversations about intimate and sexual violence, we have to be talking about disability. We have to be talking about ableism. There is no way for us to end sexual violence without disabled people at the forefront of that movement. And I want to say that for everybody here who believes in justice, who believes in freedom and liberation, who believes in ending oppression and trauma, you should be part of this movement to end child sexual abuse. Because when we are talking about child sexual abuse, we are talking about the most vulnerable members of our community being targeted at such a young age and learning firsthand what power and control looks like, what shame and blame looks like, what silence looks like. We think of CSA, child sexual abuse, often as the building blocks of oppression. If we want to end oppression, we have to look at child sexual abuse as a strategic site for liberatory work. You clap. Child sexual abuse gets used all the time as a wedge issue. If you are a prison abolitionist in this room, if you believe that cops and prisons do not make us any more safe, then you have to also support the end of child sexual abuse, because child sexual abuse gets used as a wedge all of the time for harsher and harsher sentences to build more and more prisons and for more and more cops. I am so sick of child sexual abuse being put off to the side as if it's some kind of marginal issue that we can't touch. Excuse me, child sexual abuse, when we look at the wheel of violence, child sexual abuse is firmly in the center. It is the first place that so many of us have been traumatized, that so many of us have been abused and learned firsthand what all of those things look like. It is when we look at and when we think about what it takes to break generational cycles of violence, child sexual abuse is one of the most strategic sites that we can do work around. And the people in this room, we are not only just queer and trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary, we are part of so many different communities. And I say this all the time, you know, how is it that we can't protect our children? I'm not talking about from a white police officer, I'm not talking about from a shitty landlord, I'm not talking about from border control, I'm talking about within our own families, within our own communities, within our own places of worship, wherever it may be. Why is it that we cannot protect our own children? And why is it that we haven't paid more attention to that question? Because if we build a world that's safe for children, it will be a world that is safe for all of us. We cannot continue to be out in the streets and on Instagram and Facebook talking about no cops, no police, no prisons, no criminal legal system, but then when violence happens, we just send people right to the very systems that we know are already harming us, right? We cannot keep doing that. We have to build community responses to violence that happens within our own communities, and they have to be transformative, they have to be generative. And I know that all of us here, we're like, yes, yes. And at the same time, I know that there's a lot of unaddressed harm here in this room, even, by organizations that are represented here in this room, by people that are here in this room. So I want us also to think about and start with ourselves. Who are the people that you will call on if violence happened to you? How are you working on your own accountability every day? We love to talk about how everybody else needs to be accountable. How are you learning to take accountability for your own actions? This is the work that we're trying to build with the BATJC. I know it's a long acronym. We're getting on it. We're working on it. This is the work that we're trying to build with the BATJC in the Bay Area. We're trying to figure out what would it look like to build community infrastructure so that anybody in our community who is harmed or who has done harm and is seeking help and support to take accountability for that harm, or who has witnessed harm or been impacted by harm, that they can have resources in their own communities, that people don't have to leave their communities and leave their movements for help to get healed. All of that should be a giant red flag to us. We have to do better. We have to do better for ourselves and each other. I want every single conference from now on to have a track that's skills building around healthy communication, how to build healthy relationships, how to handle conflict. Forget about harm and violence and abuse. We don't even know how to handle conflict and misunderstandings well. Breakups divide entire communities, whether we're talking about romantic breakups, friend breakups, leadership breakups, whatever. We don't even know how to handle those well. So I want us to not only focus on the incidences of violence and harm and abuse, but also to think about what are the conditions that create them. Because it's not just Trump. It is the conditions that created Trump as well.
Okay, so I am so excited that we managed to do all of our opening statements and still have 21 minutes left, so great. We're amazing. My question to all of you, thinking about the fact that we are at the largest annual conference that brings people under the LGBTQI+ umbrella together in the country, right? How specifically can LGBTQ organizations incorporate work around child sexual abuse? I'm just going to throw that out to the four of you, whoever wants to respond first.
Well, I think there is a couple of different things, obviously, that we can do that could be simple. I think the very first thing that we need to do is really acknowledge that this issue exists among the people that are our friends, the people who we employ, the people that we hang out with, even our own families, right? Like some of them have gone through the same thing. So that's one thing, but also how can we incorporate empowerment, skill building sessions to the people that work with us? Because, you know, again, being that many of us experience this issue in our community, but we're told to not say anything about it and we're ashamed about it, it'll help us really like understand how everything manifests in our lives. So I think that's one thing, but obviously all of those things require resources, right? So make sure that you put money to the side. And I know that organizations, particularly nonprofit organizations, you know, are supposed to fundraise, right? To continue to have your organization to continue to function, right? And so when you have money that you can allocate to support individuals who are experts in this field, to support you and the work that you need to do, even if you don't know how to even to begin, right? Like, we can support you, we can help you, there's support. But also, like on a more, I guess, not just our organizations, but also and the different movements that we're part of, right? Like Mia just mentioned one particular movement, right? But I'm part of many different movements, for instance, right? And so how do we bring this healing, because there's healing that needs to happen into the different movements? Because the way the different movements are and the way we're functioning is that we're like crabs in the buckets. Like even in the LGBTQ community, even in the trans community, you know, like we, instead of supporting each other, we're tearing each other down, right? Because we want to sort of like, you know, that's how we're programmed to think, right? And so how do we support people? How do we support the different movements to bring light to this issue that is, in my opinion, the core of the many different issues that we experience?
Thank you, Bamby. Aisha, next.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what's really, really critical is that that we no longer silo it, and that we are very specific about talking about child sexual abuse, and just not kind of like masking it. I believe that child sexual abuse is a foundational core to all forms of violence, around specifically sexual violence, but all forms of violence. This country's founded on rape, so it's in the DNA, it's the fabric of this country. So I think that it needs to be a part of liberation work. So if we're talking about queer liberation, we have to be talking about eradicating child sexual abuse. And it should not, as I just said, being pushed in silo, that we have to figure out how to incorporate it. And then also, given the statistics and how many of us have been impacted by it, either directly or indirectly, how that plays itself out in all the dynamics, in terms of how we engage with each other, how we learn how to deal with conflict, how we learn how to deal with shame and blame. All of those things, I think, are formed when we are children. And so that if we don't address it, it just plays itself out in really vicious ways, and so that we have to address it if we really want to change cultures and eradicate violence.
Thank you. I want to share something from my own vault as an organizer. I've been organizing along with many of you in different pieces of social justice movements for 20 years now. I'm 40. Sometimes I hear that I don't look it, but I am. And when I was younger, I was very vocal always about being a survivor of child sexual abuse because of state involvement in my life when I was 13 and being put into group therapy when I was 16. And I just learned that by talking to other survivors specifically, I found some healing and broke isolation. And it was in one of my early getting paid to do community organizing work jobs that I really experienced my first political heartbreak. And I know that several of you have had similar moments, so I want to share that with the audience. So I was employed in Brooklyn at a membership-based organization, and I was the director of youth organizing. Two things about being a youth organizer, okay? The way we treat youth organizers in the larger social justice movement as if we're like doing cute babysitting after school programs. That is not okay, right? If we want to center ending child sexual abuse, we need to honor people who are helping the next generation heal and learn better ways of creating political networks and movements for liberation. Like, youth organizing work is the center of ending child sexual abuse, right? And in my mind, when I came to my boss at the time, who, by the way, was another queer woman of color, so these identity politics notions that somehow we're going to become more liberated just by hiring ourselves is not true, because so many youth were disclosing to me. And I was never out to my youth members and colleagues just for the sake of being out, but if someone would tell me, hey, I'm experiencing this at home, I would disclose back, just so they wouldn't feel alone. So I said to my boss, look, these young people, we had over 100 youth members in the program, are coming to me saying they want to do a campaign around ending sexual violence in their homes, in their families, in their communities. Now, this is an organization that led funded campaigns to end police violence in schools, to get armed police officers out of schools, and to end gentrification in our neighborhood, okay? Very big goals. And my boss looked at me and said, ending child sexual abuse is not a winnable issue. Ending child sexual abuse is not a winnable issue, right? And to this day, we don't have a national foundation. Besides the small network that funds our fellowships, there is no national foundation that is directing dollars specifically to the work of ending child sexual abuse. We have lost our political imagination magically. We can imagine cops out of schools. We can imagine ending gentrification, right? We can imagine ending borders, but we can't imagine ending childhood rape. It's an egregious failure to the young people in our communities. And so I want to ask my beloved comrades, when you think about a world without child sexual abuse, either what does it look like or how do we get there? Because I know you can imagine it.
I mean, I still want to just go back to organizational stuff, and I'm thinking a lot about space, right? I think just offering space, right? Even here, Creating Change, every year I do Sexy Survivor, and every year it's packed. It's a packed room, and this year we got 3 hours to do it. We could have did 5 or 6 hours of it, right? Because so many people have so much trauma, right? So just allowing a space to be available is one thing. I could even see offering information, especially when you're having new hires or for employees, right? Having the information available for resources, right? Around whether it's therapy or groups or I often feel like organizations should have a healing space. I mean, we have them at conferences, and I often hear people say, oh my God, there's so many healers, everybody's a healer. There's a reason why everybody's a fucking healer. It's because we need the goddamn healing. That's why. We need the healing, you know? So why don't we carve out these spaces for, you know, that we can access for those healing, right? That it doesn't have to happen, there's a special occasion, there's a conference, oh, we have a healing space, right? So if it's integrated into the organization, and as well as Bamby said, like having funding, like set aside for this stuff, it shouldn't be something that's talked about in the aftermath. It has to be right at the forefront, you know, of that. And for me, when I think about a world without child sexual abuse, I really see this beautiful world of like intergenerational like conversations, love and joy, and talking about sex and sexuality and friendship and connection and all of these ways without fear, because it's that very fear that actually fosters it's the mechanism that perpetrators, harm doers actually abuse children, because we're so scared to talk about it. It's the information that they don't have. So they can, you know, they can be targeted in that way. So I see a world where people are actually free to speak, to share, to be curious, to show desire, to not be shamed for those desires, and just to love freely and openly, and be able to speak and say when something feels wrong and be believed. I mean, just fucking be believed. Like, something happened to me, I believe you, and then go from there. So it's this lack of belief, and I think a lot of us have talked about this before. It's like, even in our adult lives, like, I constantly feel like people don't believe me every time I speak, because it's from my trauma. You know, every time I open my mouth, I'm like, they're not gonna believe me, and I feel like I have to just be a little extra with it so that it can really, you know, hone in. CSA is not an event that happened when we were children. It is a constant. It is something that lives with us and walks with us through the rest of our lives. So we need to be integrating all of this work. Right.
Thank you. Other folks, Mia? So I'll say one of the ways that I think we can get there is by, one, having frank and real conversations that are nuanced and complex about accountability. And what is accountability? I know everybody loves to use that word, but what the hell does it mean? And if we believe in justice, then we have to understand what accountability looks like on a micro level between each other, because if we can't even be accountable to ourselves and each other, then how are we gonna hold the state accountable? How are we gonna hold institutions accountable? And I include ourselves, because most of us are in an abusive relationship with ourselves. Most of us treat ourselves in ways that we would never treat anybody else. So I think we have to have real, deep conversations about accountability and healing, because those two things are also bound up. And questions about accountability are inevitably questions about justice. Questions about justice are inevitably questions about accountability. Whenever we're talking about justice, we're talking about accountability. Whenever we're talking about accountability, we're talking about justice. And if we don't know what those things mean, then what are we fighting for? Like, what is this work that we're doing? So I would say that is one. And another one that I would say is to build relationships with the children and youth in your life. Like, literally, maybe you live in an apartment complex and you see some kids every day. Build a relationship with them. Build relationships with the adults in your life and talk to them about how can we protect and keep youth and children safe. You know, I think child sexual abuse is a very unique form of violence, because it, you know, I know in other types of sexual violence, for example, there's a lot of controversy around like bystander intervention and all this crap. But when we talk about CSA, we literally need protective bystanders, because it is not, the burden should not be placed on children and youth to protect themselves. It is on us as adults to protect them. A 5-year-old is not going to call us to spearhead a community accountability process. It is on us. It is our responsibility to step in whenever we see their boundaries being trampled, whenever we see people forcing them to give a kiss or a hug to somebody when they don't want to, for example. Whenever we see any kind of injustice that's happening around children and youth, we have to step in. It is our responsibility as adults to do that. And to leave that burden on them is so irresponsible and also just selfish. So I would say those things. I think when we think about who you would call on around, like I would say for every single person in this room to think about who you would call on, the literal actual names of individual people if you were experiencing violence, whether you were surviving it or doing it or witnessing it. But also think about who are the people that kids in your life can call. Tell them that you're somebody that they can talk to and model it for them. Talk to them about things that you are embarrassed about or that you felt ashamed of doing. That will open up more space for them to talk to you about those things. Talk to them about things you're scared about. That will open up space for them to talk about things that they're scared about. So I would say some of those.
Thank you. Oh. I want to ask Aisha or Bamby, do you have something you'd like to share around either what a world without childhood rape looks like or how we get there?
You know, a lot of people have this concept of heaven, right? And again, you know, we're told that like, oh, if you do this, right, or whatever, right, like you're gonna go to heaven, right? And many of us imagine that, right? I think there is a paradise that we can form here, right? And it could be however we form it, right? But I think the way that we can get there is one, understanding the power that we have individually, right? The power that we have to heal, to understand ourselves, and to really see that we are in this planet, in this earth, because we're chosen to be here. And it's our right to be here. And it is up to us to really grapple with that and really understand ourselves, but also be able to understand others and really understand each other's humanity, right? One of the things that I'm practicing intentionally is hugging people left to left, which is where our hearts are, right? Like we need to have that human connection. We need to have that heart-to-heart, you know, touch, right? I think we can get there if we really intentionally practice in little things that we don't. We're taught to hug, we automatically hug people like the other way, right? But if we practice those little things, I think we can end the shame that has been built in ourselves. And we can live in the heaven that they tell us that exists, but we can make it happen here.
Aisha? Yes, I'll briefly. One of the things that I think a lot about in terms of my own history is there was no way, I do not believe that anyone would have known what was going on, but I did tell at 10. And so I think for me, the first way to get there is to be committed to disrupting it. And so my parents did not disrupt it when I told them what was going on, and so it continued. And so I think it's just really first and foremost believing, and then and also creating relationships within families. So there's a family member who I had a very difficult relationship with as an adult, and recognized that I had a responsibility to go back to them and really, be accountable for the harm that I caused them. And that created space for them to reach out to me around sexual violence in their family. So I was able to be a resource person for a young person for a young person's life. And so couldn't prevent that, but I think that the work that we did for that young person, it laid down the foundation to prevent it for younger siblings. So for me, I think that we get there is to have a non-negotiable commitment to disrupting it, and if there should be no doubt if someone says this is happening, that we just address it immediately and address it with compassion and care, but not in a way where a young person is ever feeling like they are not believed.
Thank you. Lightning round, any 30-second final comments?
I just want to mention the caregiver survey that I have on my website, igrivera.com. It's a survey for caregivers, parents, adoptive parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, anyone who has a young person in their lives to take, and that will help inform the toolkit that I will be creating this year to help families really talk to their children about sex and sexuality, and really as a relationship builder between adults and young people, so that it is a preventative measure for CSA.
Thank you.
One thing I just want to say is in terms of my own growth as a cis queer, unapologetically queer person, is that who's been working on violence, like I historically have always thought about violence as cisgender heterosexual violence committed against cisgender women, right? And definitely as how rape was used as a weapon of homophobia against cisgender women. And so through my own work and evolution and process, just recognizing and learning through many of you on here and others, that sexual violence knows no boundary. And so with this new project, Love with Accountability, the anthology, Digging Up the Roots of Child Sexual Abuse, it's including the writings of 40 diasporic Black survivors transcending gender, sexuality, gender identity. And that's coming out in the fall, so just want to share that. And that's you can find out more information at lovewithaccountability.com.
Thank you. Any last? Did you have something you want to say? I have closing remarks, but quick. Yes, please.
No, go ahead.
No? Are you sure? It looks like you want to share something. You should.
You. One thing that I would say is that I think we need to share stories and make more space for us to talk about the harm that we've caused, because most of us have all been caused harm or been complicit in harm, whether it's through our privilege, whether it's through other kinds of actions that we've done around like intimate and sexual violence, for example. I think we need to make more space to talk about that, because yes, absolutely believing survivors, and I also think that we can't end sexual violence if we only work with survivors, one. And then also, survivors and harmers, they're not mutually exclusive. Right. Most of us here are both. Most of us here have survived some kind of harm or violence and abuse. Most of us have done or been complicit in some kind of violence, harm, or abuse. And it gets to be a real slippery slope when you start to pick and choose which is worse, to be complicit in something or to have done it. It gets to be real slippery slope real fast. So I would say to do that more, open up more spaces where we can share, even if it's just you and your bestie sitting on a couch with some tea talking about it. Maybe you don't drink tea, but whatever. Maybe it's a glass of wine, who knows? But like, have those conversations. Talk about what your values are together. I would say those two things, and then also in a collective sense, I really am pushing for transformative justice organizing. Not just responding to these different incidences, but how do we actually organize and build community infrastructure? What would it look like to have a network of community safe houses, for example, where survivors or people fleeing harm could go to?
Thank you. Bamby, closing
And,
1 minute.
I just want to say that, I am very committed to bring light to end child sexual abuse. And I understand how that has manifested in my life. And I want to invite all of you to really think about that. And not only if you're a survivor of child sexual abuse, but understand that there are many people among us who may have been. And so how we can find ways to support those individuals and understand the complexities of it. I know that I myself am committed, and it's hard work to do, to recognize it's painful, but it is amazing when you walk in your truth. So please support those who have been victims of child sexual abuse.
Thank you. So it's my great honor to take it home. So much has been said here. I will say, in my own vision for a world in which children don't get raped, it's so clear to me after holding space across the country in this Mirror Memoirs container that we need to stop gendering children in utero before they can speak, right? We don't know a child's gender when a child is born. We just don't. And a lot of harm that people in our community have experienced has been because people impose a gender that's actually not real for that child, right? And then they get punished when they try to show us who they are. So that is something really simple that at least in the LGBT community, under this umbrella that we all live under, we can change that, right? We can allow room for the children in our lives to show us who they are. And in terms of showing each other who we are, I think, it's powerful to sit here with all of you because we are all out as people who have survived rape and sexual assault in our childhoods. And we also have all, I know, been punished along the way for being out. Whether it's in our families when we first disclosed, whether it's in our jobs and our workplaces, whether it's in our friend network or our private relationships where people manipulate that survivorship, pathologize it. A lot of us live with complex PTSD, which is a disability. So it's not, and we saw what happened to Dr. Ford, who is a fairly privileged woman compared to all of us. and yet she got shamed by the president. So it is still a hard world in which survivors are asked to claim their truth. At the same time, the reason I started Mirror Memoirs is because I've been doing public storytelling work around my experience for a decade now. And I would go into queer-led retreats, protests, conferences, parties, and look around and be like, wow, everybody here has told me privately that they were raped as a child, but they don't know it about each other. So what are we missing when we can't see this wound that so many of us carry? This opportunity to find connection, to know that you're not alone. So I want to, without any pressure, I just want to invite everybody who is in this room who has experienced sexual violence to stand if you want to and be recognized in community with all of us. Please, for folks sitting, please applaud our resilience. It takes a lot. Right? I see you. We see you. I want to name that we have raised so many points that we cannot cover only in 45 minutes, and so Creating Change has granted us a healing space specifically for people of color who are survivors of sexual violence because of the ways white supremacy impacts us as children and adults. That will be held at 4:45 to 7:30 today in Cascade B, which is in the Courtyard Marriott across the Skywalk. So it's like a 20-minute walk to get there. But we have a big space that can fit over 150 people and beautiful healing activities planned. So if you feel called, join us there at 4:45. And just as our final closing, I want to say, may we all of us know a survivor, even if you're not a survivor. So may we all step into the work of answering the call to end rape culture and sexual violence in every step that we take. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was powerful. I'm going to invite you to take a deep breath with me. Let's take one more deep breath together as a collective. As a fellow survivor of childhood sexual abuse, I know how hard being a part of this plenary was for some of you. And I know that there were some folks who had to leave or could not come into this space because of how hard grappling with some of this trauma and hurt is. So for those of you who are here, thank you for your bravery and your courage. And I invite us to take 1/3 final breath together collectively. As was mentioned, there's a space specifically for folks who are survivors of child sexual abuse, who are people of color, that was described. But I also want you to see in the screens on our side, and also in your program books, and at creatingchange.org, you can find our community care spaces. There's the Many Paths Gathering Space, which is located in Latitude. For those of you who would benefit from spiritual care, there are clergy from a variety of faith traditions, from the Abrahamic traditions to non-Abrahamic traditions, like pagan and Hindu, Buddhist practices as well, in addition to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. So please take advantage of some of the programming that they have, and also the caregivers. I believe that space is open until midnight. There's also the Healing Justice Practice Space. I know for me, my tension lives in my shoulders. There are folks there who are doing massages and acupuncture and all types of healing justice practices that I encourage you to take advantage of. For those of you who particularly need some community-based care spaces, as always, we have the Asexual Aromatic Suite, the bi pansexual suites, the elder suite, people of color suite, transgender and genderqueer suite, and the youth hospitality suite. So please take advantage of them. They're free spaces, they're community spaces for folks who identify in that way.
I just have a couple other announcements about things that will be happening tonight and today that are really important to me. So, on point with this topic, we know that drug and alcohol abuse is a big issue in our community, and that a lot of times folks that have been assaulted end up falling into addiction. And so tonight from 7:30 to 8:30, there will be people in recovery in Greco on the 4th floor. And then my second announcement is about the memorial of one of my really good friends, Dr. Sheltrice McCoy. And I knew Sheltrice since I was about 18. And she was a very strong, powerful, bold Black woman, and had courage and started her own program at University of Wisconsin-Madison, the first in the country that combined both aspects of being a person of color and a person in the queer community in the first doctorate program, and that's what she got her doctorate in. There will be a memorial for her from 7:30 to 9 in LaSalle A on the 5th floor.
Thank you, Camden. I realized we didn't introduce ourselves. I'm Victoria Kirby York. I'm the Deputy Department Director for the Advocacy and Action Department for the National LGBTQ Task Force. I use she and they pronouns.
And my name is Camden Hargrove. I am the digital and community organizer at the National LGBTQ Task Force, and I use he, him pronouns.
So where my radical fairies at? We got any radical fairies in the building? I hear some clapping. We got some radical fairies. Well, if you're not a radical fairy and you are interested in seeing what being a radical fairy is about, you are also invited into the space. From 8 to 10 p.m., there will be a radical fairy circle in Marquette B on the 5th floor. Who thinks they might want to try that one out? Get a part of that radical fairy circle. Yes. It's a part of our Practice Spirit, Do Justice track here at Creating Change. From 8 to 10 p.m., remember our opening plenary during the Racial Justice Institute. We had a beautiful spirit lead us in freedom singing. Well, her film, This Little Light, will be showing again in the Mackinac Ballroom on the 5th floor.
We will also be having a fantastic dance tonight called Dances with the Ages. Yep. And the DJ will be DJ Latonia Goretz in the Renaissance Ballroom that is also on the 4th floor. Wait, this is where we are. This is where we are.
So come back here to get your party on. All right. Then we have a couple receptions. Who likes free food? Hey, I know I do. Got a couple good ones. There's the Cali Forward reception, which is going to be 8:30 to 10 o'clock. Where the Cali folks at? All right, West Coast in the house. All right, from 8:30 to 10, we have Cali Forward. It's going to be in Cadillac A and B. All right? And last but certainly not least, some of my favorite organizations in the country are teaming up for a reception. It's the Transgender Law Center, Southerners on New Ground, and Mi Gente. They're hosting an event right here, well, on the 5th floor in Richard A and B from 8 to 10 p.m. So there are lots of good things to do, to get your party on, to network, to build relationship, be in community. Thank you so much for being a part of this plenary, and I hope you have a great rest of your day here at Creating Change.